Welcome to Chronological Fiction, where real-world events meet the power of storytelling. We're here to breathe new life into history's most interesting moments by turning them into unique narratives. Join our community by subscribing, and let's explore the stories that shaped our world.
They told us about the heat before we deployed. They gave us briefings in air-conditioned rooms back in Fort Benning, showing us PowerPoint slides with temperature charts and hydration protocols. They used words like arid, oppressive, and extreme, but words are just noises we make with our mouths. They cannot prepare you for the physical reality of stepping out of a C-130 transport plane onto the tarmac at Bagram Airfield in July. It wasn't just heat, it was a physical assault. It felt like opening the door of a blast furnace and standing directly in front of the flames. The air didn't just sit there, it pushed against you. It sucked the moisture from your eyes and the saliva from your mouth in seconds. It was a dry, angry heat that smelled of jet fuel, burning rubber, and ancient dust. I remember looking at the mountains in the distance. The Hindu Kush. They looked majestic, capped with snow that seemed like a cruel joke, a mirage hanging above the oven we were trapped in. My name is Caleb Miller. I grew up in Oklahoma amidst endless rows of corn and wheat. I thought I knew what summer was. I thought I knew what dust was. I was a fool. Oklahoma is a garden compared to this place. This is where God sends the earth to die and turn into powder. We were loaded onto a convoy headed for a remote FOB, forward operating base, in the Peck Valley. They called it the Valley of Death. Catchy name, the kind of name that makes 19-year-old boys nervous and 25-year-old sergeants angry. The ride was hours of jolting misery inside an MRAP vehicle. The windows were thick, bulletproof glass that distorted the world outside, turning the mud brick villages and the terraced fields into a blurred fishbowl reality. Inside, the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the Afghan sun. We sat knee to knee, sweating into our body armor, smelling each other's fear and chewing tobacco. When we finally arrived at the FOB, I realized it wasn't a base. It was a cage. HESCO barriers, giant wire mesh baskets filled with dirt and rocks, formed the walls. Concertina wire glittered along the top like festive tinsel for a celebration no one wanted to attend. Inside the wire, it was a moonscape of gravel, tents, and plywood shacks. Outside the wire, the mountains rose up vertically, pressing in on us, watching us. We were at the bottom of a bowl, and the enemy held the rim. It was a tactical nightmare, the kind of position you learn to avoid in basic training, yet here we were, planting a flag in the bottom of a well. I threw my duffel bag onto a cot in a tent that smelled of stale sweat and old canvas. The dust was already everywhere. It was in the folds of the blanket. It was in the air. It coated my teeth with a fine grit. I would learn later that moon dust is what they call it. It's finer than sand, almost like talcum powder. It gets into your weapon, your electronics, your lungs, your soul. You can scrub for an hour in the shower, but when you dry off, the towel comes away brown. You are never clean in Afghanistan. You just add new layers of dirt. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The generator hummed a constant low-frequency drone that vibrated in my chest. I stepped outside to smoke. The sky was incredible. Without the light pollution of civilization, the Milky Way looked like a spilled bucket of diamond paint across the black canvas. It was beautiful. Terrifyingly beautiful. It made me feel small. It made me realize that the universe didn't care about America, or the Taliban, or democracy, or Caleb Miller from Oklahoma. The universe was vast and cold, and we were just ants fighting over a crumb of bread in the dirt. A shadow moved near the latrines. It was Sergeant Ramirez, cleaning his rifle by the light of a red headlamp. He didn't look up when I approached. "Can't sleep, new guy?" he asked. His voice was gravel, shaped by too many cigarettes and too much shouting. "No, Sergeant, it's the quiet. I didn't expect it to be this quiet." Ramirez stopped scrubbing. He looked up at the mountains, barely visible as jagged silhouettes against the stars. "It's not quiet, Miller," he said softly. "It's holding its breath. The valley is listening to us. Never mistake silence for peace here. Silence just means they are reloading." I looked at the mountains again. Suddenly, they didn't look majestic. They looked like teeth. The teeth of a trap waiting to snap shut. I finished my cigarette, flicked the butt into the gravel, and went back to my cot. I lay there, gripping my rifle, listening to the generator, waiting for the valley to exhale. Chapter 2. Eyes in the Walls. My first patrol was 3 days later. We were stepping off the wire to visit a local village called Shurak. The mission was Hearts and Minds. We were supposed to meet the village elders, drink tea, promise them a new well or a school, and ask if they had seen any bad guys. It sounded simple, our armed neighborhood watchwalk. But nothing is simple when you are carrying 80 pounds of gear in 100-degree heat. The weight of the armor is crushing. The Kevlar vest sits on your shoulders like a yoke on an ox. The ceramic plates press against your chest and back. Then there is the ammo. 6 magazines on your chest, more in your pack. The water bladder, the radio, the batteries, the grenades. You are a walking tank, but a tank made of soft flesh and breakable bones. We moved in a staggered column, spacing ourselves out so one grenade wouldn't take out the whole squad. I was walking third. My eyes scanned the ground constantly. We had been briefed on IEDs, improvised explosive devices. They could be anything. A pile of rocks, a disturbed patch of dirt, a soda can, a dead dog. The ground itself was the enemy. Every step was a gamble. You put your boot down and prayed that the earth wouldn't erupt in fire and shrapnel. Left foot, pray. Right foot, pray. It was a rhythmic meditation of terror. The village appeared out of the dust like a hallucination. High walls made of dried mud, the color of dried blood. Compounds with no windows, just heavy wooden doors. It looked biblical. If you took away our rifles and radios, we could have been Roman legionnaires marching into Judea 2,000 years ago. The smell hit us before we entered. Burning trash, animal dung, unwashed bodies, and spices, cumin and cardamom mixed with the rot. As we walked down the main dirt track, the village seemed empty, but I could feel them, the eyes. "Check your 6, Ramirez crackled over the radio. "Watch the rooftops." I looked up. On a flat roof, a woman in a blue burqa was watching us. She was a ghost, a shapeless form. She didn't move. She just stood there, a blue statue against the brown mud. What was she thinking? Did she hate us? Did she fear us? Or were we just another passing storm, like the Russians before us and the British before them? Then the children came. They poured out of the alleyways like water. Ragged clothes, dusty faces, bright eyes. Mister, pen, chocolate?" They ran alongside us, fearless. They touched our uniforms, pointed at our guns. "Back, stay back," shouted Jenkins, the point man. He waved his hand, not aggressively, but firmly. We couldn't let them get too close. A child could carry a suicide vest. A child could be a spotter. It was the cruelest math of war. Innocence is a variable you cannot trust. I saw a boy, maybe 7 years old. He had green eyes, that startling, piercing Afghan green that looks right through you. He wasn't asking for chocolate. He was holding a rock, just a small stone. He looked at me and then he looked at my rifle. He weighed the stone in his hand. I tightened my grip on the pistol grip of my M4. I was a grown man, a trained soldier, armored like a knight, terrified of a 7-year-old with a rock. The boy didn't throw it. He just dropped it in the dust and spat on the ground. It was a gesture of pure, distilled contempt. He turned and ran away. That spit hit me harder than the rock would have. It told me everything I needed to know about hearts and minds. We could build them 100 wells. We could pave their roads with gold, but we would always be the aliens in the spacesuits. We would always be the invaders. We met the elders in the center of the village. They sat on rugs under a mulberry tree. Their beards were dyed henna orange. Their faces were maps of deep wrinkles, etched by sun and hardship. The lieutenant took off his helmet and sat with them. Through the interpreter they talked. "We want peace," the lieutenant said. "We want peace too," the elder replied, his hands folded. "But peace comes when the wolves leave the valley." He didn't say who the wolves were. He didn't have to. We walked back to the fob in the afternoon heat. The sun was at its peak. The sweat ran down my back into the crack of my arse, creating a chafing rawness that stung with every step. My water was hot, tasting of plastic. My knees ached. I looked back at the village. The blue ghost woman was still on the roof, watching, always watching. I realized then that we didn't own the ground we walked on. We were just renting it, paying the lease in sweat and adrenaline, and sooner or later, the landlord would come to collect. Chapter 3: The Green Ghosts. Night in the Valley is a different war. In the day, the enemy hides. In the night, they own the world. We have the technology. We have night vision goggles, NVGs. We call them nods. When you flip them down over your eyes, the world turns into a grainy, monochromatic green phosphorescence. It narrows your field of view to a 40-degree tube. You lose your depth perception. Shadows become black pits. Starlight becomes a blinding flare. I was on guard duty in the tower. Tower 3, the one facing the river. It was 0200 hours, the witching hour. The air had cooled down, but the rocks radiated the heat stored during the day. I stood behind the M240 machine gun, scanning the tree line along the river. Through the nodies, the trees looked like green skeletons. The river was a ribbon of black oil. It creates a dissociation. You don't feel like you are looking at the real world. You feel like you are playing a video game. The green glow makes everything look surreal, supernatural. You see a coyote trot across the field, and it looks like a demon. You see a branch sway in the wind, and it looks like a man signaling an attack. Your brain tries to fill in the gaps in the grainy image, and usually it fills them with your worst nightmares. "Anything out there, Miller?" The voice startled me. It was Doc, our medic. He had climbed up the ladder quietly. Doc was a quiet guy from Maine. He read philosophy books and never swore. He was the most dangerous man in the platoon because he was the only one who truly understood how fragile the human body was. "Just ghosts, Doc," I said, rubbing my eyes. "The nods give you a headache if you wear them too long. An ache that sits right behind your eyes." "Ghosts are fine," Doc said, leaning against the sandbags. "It's the living I'm worried about." He lit a cigarette, shielding the flame with his cupped hands so no sniper could see the flash. "You know what the problem with this gear is?" Doc gestured to my helmet and the goggles. "It's heavy. No, it makes us think we see everything. We think because we can turn night into day, we are gods. But we're not seeing the reality, Caleb. We're seeing a digital interpretation of light. We are seeing what the machine wants us to see." He exhaled a plume of smoke that glowed bright white in my peripheral vision. "The Taliban, they don't have no Ds. Most of them don't even have boots. But they know every rock in this valley by feel. They can walk through this darkness blindfolded because their grandfathers walked it, and their great-grandfathers. We need batteries to see. They just need their eyes." I looked back out at the green abyss. Doc was right. I felt disconnected. I was encased in technology, ceramic plates, Kevlar, radio frequencies, infrared lasers, but beneath it all, I was just a soft, scared animal. Suddenly, static burst in my earpiece. "Contact front, muzzle flashes, sector north." The calm shattered. The game was over. I swung the machine gun toward the north. In the black distance, I saw them. Tiny sparkles of light, pop, 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 not sound, just light. The sound takes seconds to travel, then the crack of the bullets passing over our heads. Snap, snap. It sounds like a whip cracking right next to your ear. "Light 'em up," Ramirez screamed from the command post. I squeezed the trigger. The M240 roared. Dug, 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 dug. The tracer's red streaks of fire flew out of the barrel, cutting through the green night. They looked like laser beams. I walked the fire onto the sparkles. We were shooting at lights. We weren't shooting at men. We were shooting at the abstract concept of an enemy. Through the green tube, I watched the tracers impact the mud wall where the shots came from. Dust plumes exploded. The sparkles stopped. Silence returned. The ringing in my ears was deafening. The smell of burnt gunpowder filled the tower, sharper than the smell of the latrines. "Did we get them?" I asked Doc. Doc was looking through his binoculars. "Maybe, or maybe they just moved, or maybe they were never there, and we just shot up a farmer's wall." I looked at my hands. They were shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump. The combat high. It's a drug. It makes you feel invincible and nauseous at the same time. I flipped my nods up. The world went black. True, impenetrable black. I realized I preferred the green lie. The black truth was too big, too empty, and filled with things that wanted to kill me. Chapter 4: The ant farm. Weeks turned into a month. The fob became our entire universe. We called it the ant farm. We scurried around inside, building, cleaning, eating, sleeping, always under the glass, always visible to the giants in the mountains. Routine set in. Routine is the anesthesia of war. It dulls the sharp edges of terror until it just becomes a background hum. Wake up, dust, eat powdered eggs that taste like wet cardboard. Dust, clean weapons. Dust, work out in the gym tent, which was just rusted weights on a plywood floor. Dust, patrol, dust, sleep, repeat. The boredom was worse than the fear. Fear is a spike, boredom is a flatline. It eats at your brain, you start to obsess over small things. A missing sock, the way Jenkins chews his gum, the specific frequency of the flies buzzing around the mess hall. We started inventing games. Rock golf was popular, hitting gravel with a shovel handle. We bet on scorpion fights. We told stories, that's what soldiers do. We trade pieces of our past to fill the emptiness of the present. I learned that Ramirez had a daughter he hadn't seen in 6 months. I learned that Jenkins wanted to open a surf shop in California, even though he had never surfed in his life. I learned that Doc was writing a book, but he wouldn't let anyone read it. "It's about us, isn't it?" Jenkins teased him one day. "You're writing about how handsome I am." "It's about the futility of human endeavor," Doc said deadpan. "So, about me trying to pick up girls?" Jenkins laughed. "We were a family, a dysfunctional, heavily armed, terrified family. We loved each other and we hated each other, but we knew with absolute certainty that we were the only thing standing between each other and the dark. But the ant farm had leaks, supplies were getting low, the roads were rigged with IEDs, so convoys were rare. We were eating MREs, meals ready to eat, 3 times a day. You trade everything. A pack of Skittles is worth a pack of cigarettes. A jalapeno cheese spread packet is gold bullion. One day the water pump broke, no showers, for 4 days. Imagine the smell of 30 men living in tents, wearing armor in 100-degree heat without showers. The air in the tent became a solid block of funk. But strangely, you stop smelling it after a while, you become nose-blind to your own rot. It was during the water shortage that we got the order. "Pack up," Ramirez said, walking into the tent. "We're pushing out. Operation Rock Avalanche. We're going up the valley, to the high ground." "Why?" I asked. "Because the colonel thinks the bad guys are getting too comfortable up there. We're going to stir the nest." Stir the nest. I looked at my M4. I looked at the picture of my mum and dad I had taped inside my locker. We weren't just stirring the nest. We were climbing into it. The routine was over. The anesthesia was wearing off. The surgery was about to begin. Chapter 5. The climb. The mountains in Afghanistan are deceptive. From the bottom, they look steep. From the slope, they look vertical. We moved out at Euro 400 under the cover of darkness. The objective was a ridgeline overlooking the village of Wanat. Intelligence said it was a staging area for insurgents. Intelligence is often just a fancy word for a rumor someone paid $20 for. We carried everything on our backs. Rucksacks weighing 100 pounds, mortar plates, machine gun ammo, so much water. The climb was agony. My lungs burned. The air gets thinner as you go up, depriving your muscles of oxygen just when they need it most. My thighs felt like they were filled with battery acid. Step, breathe, step, breathe. Don't look up. Looking up breaks your heart because the top never seems to get closer. Just look at the boots of the man in front of you. Follow the boots. Jenkins was in front of me. He was struggling. I could hear his ragged breathing over the radio. "You good, Jenks?" I whispered. "Living the dream," he wheezed. We were mules, pack animals. As the sun rose, it didn't bring warmth, it brought exposure. We were no longer hidden by the dark. We were black dots on a brown slope. Perfect targets. We reached the ridgeline by noon. We were exhausted, dripping with sweat, legs shaking uncontrollably. But we had to dig in. You don't rest, you dig. If you don't dig, you die. The ground was rock, solid granite. Our entrenching tools clanged uselessly against it. We had to pile up rocks to make low walls. Sangars, they call them, little stone nests. I sat behind a pile of shale, looking down into the valley. From up here, the war looked different. It looked map-like. I could see the river winding like a snake. I could see the patchwork of fields. It was peaceful, quiet. Too quiet, Ramirez muttered, setting up the radio antenna. He was right. There were no farmers in the fields below, no goats grazing on the slopes. The valley was empty. They knew we were here. They were just waiting for us to get tired, waiting for the sun to blind us. I took a sip of warm water. It tasted of iodine. "Hey, Cal," Jenkins said, crawling over to my position. He looked pale. "You ever think about what happens if we fall off this mountain?" "We don't fall, Jenks. I mean, metaphorically. What if we fall off the edge of the world and no one notices?" "I'll notice, Thomas," I said, "and I'll steal your jalapeno cheese spread." He smiled, a cracked, dry smile. "Deal." An hour later, the first mortar round hit. It didn't whistle, it just crumped. It landed 50 meters down the slope, a puff of grey smoke. They were bracketing us, measuring the range. "Incoming!" Ramirez screamed. The second one was closer. Crump. The ground shook. Shards of rock flew like shrapnel. And then the ridges around us erupted. It wasn't just mortars. It was machine gun fire, from the north, from the east, from above. They weren't just in the valley. They were above us. They had the high ground. We had climbed into the nest, and the wasps were home. I pressed my face into the sharp rocks. Bullets snapped over my head, chipping the stone wall. Rock dust sprayed into my eyes. "Return fire." I lifted my rifle blindly over the wall and pulled the trigger. I didn't aim. I just needed to make noise. I needed to tell them we weren't dead yet. The kingdom of dust was awake, and it was hungry. Combat is loud. That's the first thing movies get wrong. They mix the sound so you can hear the dialogue, the dramatic music, the heroes breathing. In reality, combat is a wall of noise so dense it feels solid. The crack thump of supersonic bullets passing your ear. The rhythmic chug-chug-chug of the enemy's PKM machine guns, a deeper, heavier sound than our rifles. The screaming of men trying to communicate over the din. It is an industrial cacophony, a factory of death operating at full capacity. I was pressed flat against the shale, my helmet grinding into the rock. Dust was everywhere. Every bullet that hit our stone wall sent a spray of razor-sharp rock fragments into the air. I felt them stinging my cheek, my neck. I was bleeding from a dozen tiny cuts, but I didn't feel pain. Adrenaline is a powerful drug. It shuts down the pain receptors and dilates time. "Where are they coming from?" Jenkins screamed. He was beside me, firing blindly over the wall. His eyes were wide, white circles in a face caked with dirt. "High ground, 2 o'clock. Behind the boulders," I yelled back. Though I couldn't hear my own voice. I popped up for a split second. A red tracer zipped past my face, so close I could feel the heat of it. I saw them, muzzle flashes in the rocks above us. They were dug in deep. They had prepared this ambush. We had walked right into the kill zone. I leveled my M4 and fired a burst. Pop, pop, pop. The recoil pushed against my shoulder. I watched my bullets kick up dust around a large grey rock. Did I hit anyone? I had no idea. In modern war, you rarely see the enemy. You see flashes, you see movement, you shoot at geometry. You shoot at the idea of a man. Ramirez was on the radio, screaming into the handset. "Granite 6, this is Viper 1. We are pinned down, taking heavy fire from north and east. We need air. Repeat, we need air." The radio crackled. "Viper 1, this is Granite. Fast movers are 10 mics out. Keep your heads down." 10 mics, 10 minutes. In a firefight, 10 minutes is a lifetime. Nations rise and fall in 10 minutes. You can die 1,000 times in 10 minutes. A belt of machine gun fire walked across our position. Zip, 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 zip. It chewed up the ground inches from my boot. I curled my legs in, trying to make myself smaller. I wished I could burrow into the granite like a mole. "Reloading," I shouted, dropping an empty magazine. My hands were shaking, fumbling with the fresh mag. I slapped it in and hit the bolt release. Clack. Back in the fight. But what fight? We were stuck. We couldn't move up. We couldn't move down. We were just targets on a shelf, waiting to be knocked over. Chapter 7. The Thirst. The sun didn't care that we were dying. It sat directly overhead, a white-hot eye staring down at us with indifference. It was noon. The temperature on the rocks must have been 130 degrees. We had been pinned down for 30 minutes. The intensity of the fire had slowed, turning into a sporadic, harassing rhythm. They were toying with us, keeping us pinned while the sun did the rest of the work. My mouth was dry, not just thirsty dry, but sandpaper dry. My tongue felt swollen, like a piece of felt stuck in my throat. I reached for the tube of my camelback hydration system. I bit the valve and sucked. Nothing. I sucked harder. Just warm air and the taste of plastic. Empty. Panic flared in my chest, sharper than the fear of bullets. To be out of water on this mountain was a death sentence. Water, I croaked to Jenkins. You got water? Jenkins shook his head, his eyes haunted. I drank the last of it on the climb. I'm dry, Cal. We looked at each other. Two Americans, equipped with $50,000 worth of gear, dying of thirst like biblical wanderers. Take this. Doc crawled over to us. Dragging his medical bag, he unclipped a canteen from his belt and handed it to me. Sips, Doc commanded. Wet your lips, don't gulp. If you vomit, you lose more fluids. I took the canteen. It felt lighter than it should. I took a tiny sip. The water was hot, almost boiling from the sun, but it tasted like nectar. It tasted like life. I passed it to Jenkins. He took a sip and handed it back to Doc. Doc didn't drink. He just capped it and put it back on his belt. Save it, he said. We might be here a while. Then a bullet hit a rock near Ramirez and ricocheted. Ping. It struck the water can strapped to the back of his ruck. Water, precious, clear water, sprayed out of the puncture hole, soaking the thirsty dust. We watched it spill. It was tragic. It was like watching blood pour out of a wound. Plug it, Ramirez yelled, trying to twist around. But it was too late. The desert drank it all. The dark spot on the ground evaporated in seconds, leaving no trace. The mountain was thirsty too. The heat began to warp my vision. The rocks started to shimmer. I saw shapes that weren't there. I thought I saw a river flowing down the slope. I blinked, and it was just heat haze. Stay with me, Miller, Ramirez barked, seeing my eyes lose focus. Don't you pass out on me. If you pass out, the ants get you. I nodded, gripping my rifle. The metal was hot enough to blister my skin. I held on anyway. The burn kept me awake. Chapter 8. Steel Rain. Viper 1, this is Hog 2-0. We are on station. Mark your target. The voice in the radio was calm. It was the voice of a god floating at 20,000 feet. The pilots, they were in air-conditioned cockpits, drinking cool water, looking down at our hell through high-definition screens. Smoke out, Ramirez yelled, marking target, red smoke. He threw a smoke canister over the wall. It tumbled down the slope and erupted in a cloud of crimson gas. Copy red smoke, the pilot said. I see the bad guys. Cleared hot. Danger close. Keep your heads down, boys. This is gonna get loud. We buried our faces in the dirt. We opened our mouths to equalize the pressure. Then we heard it, a low whine turning into a roar. Two A-10 warthogs dropped out of the sun. They looked like ugly, beautiful birds of prey. The first one dove. First, you see the smoke from the nose of the plane, then you see the ground explode. The rocks on the ridge above us turned into powder, the earth simply disintegrated. Then, a second later, you hear the sound. Bert! It sounds like the sky ripping open. It sounds like a giant zipper tearing the fabric of reality. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, 30mm depleted uranium shells. The ground shook so hard, my teeth clacked together. The shockwave rolled over us, pushing the air out of our lungs. The second plane dove. Bert! More dust, more destruction. The mountain was being erased. It was terrifying. It was awe-inspiring. It was the ultimate expression of violence. Then the bombs, two 500-pound J-dams. The explosion was different. It wasn't a ripping sound. It was a thud that you felt in your bowels. A plume of black smoke and debris rose hundreds of feet into the air. Rocks the size of cars were tossed like pebbles. Silence returned, but it wasn't the quiet silence of the morning. It was a stunned, ringing silence. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had stopped blowing. Even the enemy had stopped screaming. Good effect on target, the pilot drawled. We're going home to refuel. Good luck down there. And just like that, the gods flew away, leaving us back in the dirt. Chapter 9. The Red Rocks. The dust cloud hung over us for 20 minutes. It coated us in a fine grey powder. We looked like ghosts. We looked like statues dug up from Pompeii. Sound off, Ramirez called out. Casualty check. Miller, good. Jenkins, good. Doc, good. We went down the line. Everyone was alive. Battered, deafened, dehydrated, but alive. We had survived the anvil. We need to move, Ramirez said. They'll be back, or their friends will come. We need to BDA, bomb damage assessment, and then get the hell off this rock. We moved up toward the enemy positions. Cautiously, rifles up. The ridgeline was unrecognizable. The rocks were shattered. There were craters where men had been. We found pieces, a sandal, a twisted AK-47 barrel melted by the heat of the bomb, a blood trail leading into a cave. We didn't follow the blood. We didn't want to go into the caves. The caves go deep. The caves are their territory. Miller, check that pile, Ramirez pointed. I walked over to a pile of rubble. I saw an arm sticking out. It was covered in grey dust. The hand was clenched in a fist. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel justice. I just felt tired. I looked at the dead man's wrist. He was wearing a Casio watch. A cheap, plastic watch, just like mine. It was still ticking. The man was gone, erased by a machine worth millions of dollars. But his $10 watch was still keeping time. Tick, tick, tick. I felt sick. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow nausea. Let's go, I said, turning away. I've seen enough. But the mountain wasn't done with us. As we turned to leave, a single shot rang out. It wasn't a machine gun. It was a sniper, a survivor. Crack. Jenkins, who was walking 5 feet in front of me, spun around. His leg buckled. He fell hard, screaming, I'm hit! I'm hit! Man down, I screamed, diving for his collar. I dragged him behind a rock. Blood was spurting from his thigh. Bright red arterial blood against the grey dust. Doc, get up here. Doc slid into cover next to us. He went to work immediately. No panic, just smooth, practiced movements. He ripped open Jenkins' pant leg with trauma shears. Femoral artery looks okay, Doc muttered, packing the wound with combat gauze. He's lucky, through and through. Did it hit the bone? Jenkins screamed as Doc pushed the gauze into the hole. Bite on this, I said, shoving a piece of leather strap into Jenkins' mouth. Breathe, Jenks. Look at me. Look at my eyes. His eyes were wild, rolling back. Am I dying, Cal? Am I dying? No. You just got a ticket home, you lucky bastard. You're going to that surf shop. Doc tightened the tourniquet. Jenkins whimpered and passed out from the pain. He can't walk, Doc said, wiping blood on his pants. We have to carry him. I looked down the mountain. It was steep, treacherous, and miles long. Carrying a 200-pound man plus gear down that slope, it was going to be harder than the fight. Chapter 10. Gravity. Going up is agony for the lungs. Going down is agony for the knees. Carrying a stretcher made of ponchos and poles is agony for the soul. We took turns, 4 men on the stretcher, sliding on the loose shale, trying not to drop Jenkins. Every time we slipped, Jenkins groaned in his unconscious state. The sun was setting now. The valley was turning purple and orange. It was beautiful again. The land has a short memory. It forgets the violence as soon as the shadows lengthen. My shoulders screamed. The straps of the stretcher dug into my flesh. My hands were cramped into claws. Switch, Ramirez called. We rotated. I took point, scanning for IEDs on the descent. I was exhausted. My legs shook with every step. I was running on fumes. I hallucinated again. I saw the boy with the green eyes standing on a rock, watching us. I blinked, and it was just a goat. We reached the bottom of the valley in total darkness. The fob was still 3 miles away. We walked in silence. The only sound was the crunch of boots and the heavy breathing of the men carrying Jenkins. We were vulnerable. If they attacked us now, we would die. We had no fight left. We were just meat moving through the dark. But nothing happened. The valley let us pass. Maybe it was satisfied with the blood it had already taken. Or maybe it was just saving us for tomorrow. When we finally saw the lights of the phobie, the ugly yellow sodium lights, I felt a lump in my throat. It looked like the most beautiful city on earth. We walked through the gate. The guards waved us in. "Medic," someone yelled. A team rushed out to take Jenkins. They loaded him onto a gator vehicle and drove him to the aid station. I stood there, covered in dust, sweat, and Jenkins's blood. I unclipped my helmet and let it drop to the gravel. My head felt light, floating. Ramirez walked up to me. He looked like a statue made of dirt. "Good work, Miller," he said. His voice was cracked. "We didn't do anything, Sarge, I said. "We just went up, got shot at, and came back down." "We brought everyone back," Ramirez said. "That's the only victory that counts." I walked to the mess hall. I wasn't hungry, but I knew I had to eat. I grabbed a cold bottle of water. I drank it in one long gulp. It hurt my throat. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. I sat on a bench outside, looking up at the mountains. They were black silhouettes again. The nest was quiet. I took out my notebook. I wanted to write something. I wanted to explain what had happened, but all I could write was one word: dust. I closed the book. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw the traces again, green and red, beautiful and deadly. The kingdom of dust had claimed a piece of me today, and I knew with a sinking feeling in my gut that it wasn't done yet. The helicopter that took Jenkins away didn't just take a soldier, it took a piece of the squad's structural integrity. When the Black Hawk lifted off, kicking up a whirlwind of gravel and dust that stung our faces, it left behind a silence that was louder than the rotors. We watched it fade into a small black dot against the blinding blue sky, carrying Jenkins and his shattered leg back to Bagram, then to Germany, and finally to a world of surf shops and physical therapy. He was gone. He had escaped the oven. And God help us, we hated him for it. Returning to the tent was the hardest part. Jenkins' cot was empty. His gear was gone, packed up by the quartermaster, but the ghost of his presence remained. The indentation of his body was still visible on the cheap mattress. A half-read paperback novel, some Tom Clancy thriller, lay face down on the floor where he had dropped it. A pack of gum sat on his footlocker. These mundane objects became holy relics of a life interrupted. The tent felt unbalanced, like a table with one leg sawed off. The air inside seemed thinner, the shadows longer. I sat on my bunk, staring at the empty space. I needed to clean my weapon. It was a ritual, a way to regain control. I broke down my M4 carbine, separating the upper receiver from the lower. My hands moved on autopilot, scrubbing the carbon buildup from the bolt carrier group with a toothbrush dipped in CLP oil. The smell of the oil was comforting. Chemical, sharp, and clean. It was the smell of order. I scrubbed until my fingers were black with grease, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying the moment on the mountain. The crack of the bullet, the way Jenkins' leg had folded, the bright arterial red of his blood against the grey dust. "Stop scrubbing, Miller. You're going to rub the finish off," Ramirez said. He was lying on his bunk, staring at the canvas ceiling. He hadn't taken his boots off in 48 hours. "Just cleaning, Sarge," I muttered, wiping the bolt with a rag. "He's going to be fine," Ramirez said, though I hadn't asked. "Through and through. Didn't hit the femoral. He'll have a limp maybe, a cool scar to show the girls in California. He won the lottery." "I know," I said, but it didn't feel like a lottery. It felt like Russian roulette, and the cylinder had just spun past us to click on Jenkins. Who was next? The math was inevitable. There were only 6 of us left in the squad now. The odds were shrinking. That night, the fob felt different. The safety of the wire seemed fragile. I lay in the dark, listening to the breathing of the other men. It was a chorus of exhaustion, snoring, wheezing, the occasional whimper of a nightmare. But there was a gap in the rhythm. Jenkins' snore, a high-pitched whistle that used to drive me crazy, was missing. The silence where that whistle should have been kept me awake until dawn. I realized then that a squad isn't just a military unit, it's a single organism. When you cut off a piece, the whole body goes into shock. We were suffering from phantom limb pain, aching for a brother who was no longer there. Chapter 12. The tea cellar and the spider. The next few days blurred into a haze of base security details and heat stroke. To break the monotony, the captain allowed a small bazaar to open near the main gate on Fridays. Local nationals, vetted, searched, and scanned, were allowed inside the perimeter to sell cheap electronics, bootleg DVDs, and rugs. It was supposed to boost morale and help the local economy. To me, it felt like inviting the wolves into the sheep pen, even if the wolves were shaved and smiling. I was assigned to overwatch duty at the bazaar. I stood on a HESCO barrier, my rifle slung low, watching the transaction of commerce in the dust. The locals moved with a fluidity that we lacked. They wore loose chalwar camise tunics that caught the breeze, while we suffocated in 50 pounds of nylon and ceramic. One man stood out. He wasn't selling DVDs. He was an old man with a beard, dyed a shocking shade of orange, with henna, selling tea and naan bread. He had a face like a dried apple, wrinkled and brown, but his eyes were sharp, darting everywhere. He smiled too much. In this valley, smiling is suspicious. Happiness is a scarce resource. If you have too much of it, you're hiding something. "Hey, GI, you want chai?" he called out to me, holding up a thermos. I shook my head. "No, back away from the barrier." He bowed, his hand over his heart. "No problem, mister. Good tea, hot, sweet, good for the heat." He moved on to a group of mechanics. I watched him. I watched his hands. Were they rough like a farmer's, or calloused in specific places like a man who handles an AK-47? I watched his eyes. Was he looking at the merchandise, or was he counting the number of M-wraps in the motor pool? Was he pacing the distance from the gate to the command post? Paranoia is a weed. Once it takes root, it grows fast. I started to see threats in everything. The way the tea seller poured the liquid. Was he signaling someone? The pattern of the rugs hanging on the display. Was it a map? "You're staring, Cal," Doc said, coming up beside me. He had a book in his hand, as always. "That guy," I nodded at the tea seller. "I don't like him." "That's Hakim," Doc said. "He's been selling tea here since the 10th Mountain Division was here 3 years ago. He's harmless." "Nobody is harmless, Doc, you know that. Innocence is just a matter of timing." Doc sighed and leaned against the barrier. "You need to decompress, Cal. You're wound tighter than a snare drum. If you treat everyone like a terrorist, you eventually create terrorists. That's the paradox of counterinsurgency." "I don't care about paradoxes," I spat, watching Hakim laugh with a mechanic. "I care about not getting blown up while I'm buying a Gatorade." Doc looked at me with those sad, intelligent eyes. "The war is in your head now. That's the dangerous part. The valley is just geography. The war is the lens you're looking through. Try to wipe the lens occasionally." He walked away, opening his book. I looked back at Hakim. The old man caught my eye. He stopped smiling. For a second, just a microsecond, his face went blank. Cold, assessing. Then the smile snapped back into place, a mask of subservience. I gripped my rifle. Doc was wrong. The war wasn't just in my head. The spider was in the web, and we were the flies buzzing around, thinking we were the ones in control because we had the bigger wings. I made a mental note to watch Hakim. I would watch him until he made a mistake. Chapter 13. The green on blue. Tension creates friction, and friction creates heat. The heat inside the fob was reaching a boiling point. It wasn't just the enemy outside, it was the allies inside. We shared the base with a platoon of ANA, Afghan National Army. They were supposed to be our partners. We were supposed to train them, fight with them, and eventually hand the keys to the country over to them. In reality, it was like trying to teach a cat to march. They were undisciplined, high on hashish half the time, and their loyalty was as shifting as the sand dunes. We called incidents where Afghan soldiers turned their guns on Americans green on blue. It was the ultimate nightmare. You sleep next to them, eat with them, and then one day, for reasons you never understand, a bribe, a threat to their family, a sudden religious epiphany, they put a bullet in your back. On Tuesday, we were at the firing range for a joint weapons calibration. It was supposed to be a bonding exercise. Ramirez was instructing an ANA sergeant on how to zero his M16. The ANA soldier, a guy named Farhad, was laughing, waving the loaded weapon around like a toy. "Watch your muzzle discipline," Ramirez barked, pushing the barrel down range. Farhad said something in Pashto to his friends. They all laughed. It was a hard, mocking laugh. "What did he say?" I asked our interpreter, Tariq. Tariq looked nervous. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "He say, He say Americans worry too much. He say Allah guides the bullet, not the sights. Tell him Allah doesn't clear the jam when his weapon malfunctions, I growled. Farhad looked at me. He had dead eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen things no human should see. He stepped closer to me, chest to chest. He smelled of unwashed wool and old tobacco. He tapped his chest, then pointed at the target. Then he swung his rifle, not at the target. He swung it in a wide arc that passed directly over my stomach. My hand went to my pistol. The safety was off before I even realized I had drawn it. "Drop it," I screamed. "Drop the weapon." The range went silent. 30 men, American and Afghan, froze. The air crackled with sudden, lethal electricity. Every hand hovered over a trigger. This was it. The spark in the powder keg. Farhad stared at me. He smiled, a slow, lazy smile that showed rotting teeth. He knew he had pushed me. He wanted to see if I would break. "Calm down, Miller," Ramirez said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's just playing." He flagged me, Sarge. He pointed a loaded weapon at me. "I know. Stand down. That's an order." I stared at Farhad. I wanted to shoot him. Every instinct in my body screamed that this man was the enemy. He wasn't wearing a turban, he was wearing a uniform we paid for. But his heart was in the mountains. Slowly, agonizingly, I lowered my pistol. Farhad laughed again, turned and fired a burst downrange. He missed the target completely. "Good shot," he said in broken English, mocking me. Later in the chow hall, I couldn't eat. My hands were trembling with rage. "We're training them to kill us," I told Ramirez. Ramirez sighed, stirring his chili mac. "We're training them to hold the line so we can go home, Cal. It's not perfect. It's messy, but it's the mission. He's going to turn, Sarge. I saw it in his eyes. He's waiting for the right moment." "Maybe," Ramirez admitted, looking tired. "So you watch him. You watch him like a hawk. But you don't start a war inside the wire. We have enough people trying to kill us outside." I looked across the mess hall. Farhad was sitting with his squad, eating with his hands. He looked up and caught my gaze. He didn't look away. He made a shape with his hand, a gun shape, and pulled the trigger. Chapter 14. Letters from Mars. Mail call is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's the only proof that a world exists outside the ant farm. On the other hand, reading letters from home feels like receiving transmissions from an alien planet. They talk about things that don't make sense anymore. Traffic jams, the price of gas. Who won the football game? Who broke up with whom? I received a thick envelope from my mother. It smelled of lavender laundry detergent. That smell, it hit me like a physical blow. It was the smell of my childhood bedroom. It was the smell of safety. I sat on my bunk, holding the envelope, afraid to open it. Opening it meant letting the softness in, and I needed to be hard. I finally tore it open. There were photos. My dog Buster sleeping on the porch. My dad standing next to his new tractor, looking proud. A picture of the family at a barbecue. Everyone was smiling. Their teeth were so white. Their clothes were so clean. The grass was so green, it looked fake. I read the letter. "Dear Caleb, we miss you so much. The corn is coming in high this year. Dad says it's going to be a record harvest. Cindy got married to that boy from Tulsa, can you believe it? We pray for you every night. Stay safe. Don't take any risks." "Don't take any risks," I laughed. A dry, choking sound. How do I explain to her that breathing here is a risk? How do I explain that I sleep with a loaded rifle against my cheek? How do I explain that I almost killed a man today because he smiled at me the wrong way? I looked at the photo of my dad. He looked worried, even in the picture. He knew. He had been in Vietnam. He knew that the boy who came back wouldn't be the boy who left. I tried to write back. I put my pen to the paper. "Dear Mom and Dad." I stopped. What could I say? Today I ate powdered eggs. Today I watched a dust devil tear through the latrines. Today I imagined shooting a man in the face. I couldn't write that. I had to protect them. That was part of the job. We absorb the horror so they can worry about the harvest. "I am fine," I wrote. "The food is okay. The guys are great. It's hot, but I'm drinking water. Don't worry about me. I'm just bored mostly." Lies, all lies. I was writing fiction. I sealed the envelope. I felt a profound sense of isolation. I was drifting in space, tethered to Earth by a thin line of ink, but the line was fraying. That night, on guard duty, the dissociation hit me hard. I looked at the moon. It was the same moon they were seeing in Oklahoma. But it looked different here. It looked diseased. I started to hallucinate again. I saw Jenkins sitting on the sandbags next to me. "You lied to them, Cal," the hallucination said. "I had to," I whispered to the empty air. "You can't go back," Jenkins said, his leg bleeding onto the floor. "You belong to the dust now." I rubbed my eyes until I saw stars. When I opened them, Jenkins was gone. But the feeling remained. I was becoming a creature of this valley. The Caleb from Oklahoma was fading, replaced by Sergeant Miller, the man who watched for spiders in the web. Chapter 15. The trap, the calm before the storm, is a cliché, but it exists. For 3 days, nothing happened. No mortars, no sniper fire. The valley was silent. It was the silence of a held breath. Then the intelligence drop came. Ramirez gathered us in the command tent. A map was spread out on the table. "All right, listen up," Ramirez said. "Intel suggests a high-value target, HVT, has moved into a compound in the village of Wanat. A mid-level Taliban commander named Mullah Aziz. This guy is responsible for the IEDs en route California." "Source?" Doc asked, skeptical as always. "Human intelligence, a walk-in source." I felt a cold shiver. "Who?" "The T-seller, Hakim." Ramirez hesitated. "Classified, but the source is rated reliable." "Reliable?" I scoffed. "Like the intel that sent us up Rock Avalanche." "This feels wrong, Sarge. It feels too easy. Why would he just move into a village we patrol?" "Maybe he thinks we're weak," Ramirez said. "Maybe he thinks we're scared after the ambush. We need to show him we're not." The mission profile was aggressive, a night-air assault. Helos would drop us outside the village. We would cordon and search the compound, grab the target. Exfil by sunrise. "Grab and go," Ramirez said. "In and out, clean." Nothing in this war is clean. As we prepped our gear, the mood was dark. We weren't excited. We were grim. We loaded magazines with mechanical precision. We checked our batteries. We wrote our letters just in case. I saw Farhad, the ANA soldier, watching us from the edge of the motor pool. He wasn't going on this mission. It was US only. He was smiling again, that knowing, rotting smile. He pulled a cell phone from his pocket and typed a message. Then he looked at me and winked. My stomach dropped. "He knows," I told Doc, who was packing trauma dressings. "Farhad knows we're going." "He's Anna, Cal. He probably knows the patrol schedule." "No, he's texting someone. He's telling them we're coming." I went to Ramirez. "Sarge, Farhad is compromised. We need to cancel or change the LZ." Ramirez looked stressed. "I can't call off a battalion-level mission because you have a bad feeling about a guy, Miller. We have drones up. We have AC-130 gunship support on standby. We have the might of the US military behind us." "The Russians had gunships too," I muttered. "Didn't help them." We boarded the Chinooks at Aero 200. The giant dual-rotor helicopters roared to life. The back ramp lifted, sealing us inside the belly of the beast. The smell of hydraulic fluid and jet fuel filled the cabin. I looked around at the faces of my squad. Doc, eyes closed, meditating. Jenkins' replacement, a nervous kid named Kowalski who looked like he should be in high school. Ramirez, checking his map. The helicopter lifted off, lurching into the night sky. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It wasn't the usual pre-mission jitters. It was a heavy, sinking dread. We weren't hunting a target. We were the bait, and the trap was about to snap shut. Harika bir karar. Hikayeyi 25 bölüme çıkarmak, özellikle savaşın sonrasını, PTSD, eve dönüş travmasını ve savaşın bitmediği gerçeğini çok daha detaylı işlememize olanak tanıyacak. Bu sayede hikaye sadece bir aksiyon değil, derin bir psikolojik romana dönüşecek. Aşağıda bölüm 16'dan 20'ye kadar olan kısmı yazıyorum. Bu blokta büyük pusu, kayıp ve hava desteğini en yoğun haliyle işleyeceğiz. Part 4. The Kill Box. Chapter 79. The Green Silence. The Chinook touched down with a violence that rattled my teeth. The back ramp dropped into the swirling dust, and we surged out into the darkness like hounds released from a cage. "Go, go, go," Ramirez shouted over the comms, though his voice was barely audible over the whine of the turbines. We sprinted 50 meters to a low mud wall and took a knee, weapons up, scanning the green-tinted hellscape through our NVGs. The helicopter lifted off immediately, leaving us in a silence that felt heavy, almost pressurized. The village of Wanat lay before us. Through the green phosphor of my night vision goggles, it looked like a graveyard on the moon. The compounds were dark squares. The alleyways were black veins. There were no lights, no barking dogs, no smell of cooking fires. "Too quiet," Kowalski whispered. His voice was trembling. I could hear his heart rate in his breathing. "Cut the chatter," I hissed. We moved in a stack, hugging the walls. My boots crunched softly on the gravel. Every sound felt amplified, the rustle of nylon, the click of a safety, the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. We reached the target compound, target building Alpha. The breach team moved up. "Breaching!" A shotgun blast blew the hinges off the wooden door. We flooded inside, weapons sweeping the corners. Clear left, clear right, room clear. The main room was empty. There was a rug on the floor, a teapot that was cold to the touch, but no Mullah Aziz, no bodyguards, no IED materials, just a single battery-operated lantern sitting in the center of the room. It was turned on. I stared at the lantern. It was a message. "It's a dry hole," Ramirez said, frustration leaking into his voice. Intel was bad, again. I looked around the room. There was fresh tea in the pot, but it was cold. They had left. Maybe an hour ago? Just enough time to set the stage. "Sarge," I said, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. "This isn't just a dry hole. It's a stage prop. Look at the lantern. They wanted us to come into this room." Then the radio crackled. It wasn't our command. It was a burst of static, followed by a voice speaking in Pashto, laughing. "They're jamming our comms," Doc said, looking at his radio. "I've got nothing but ghost chatter." Outside, a single flare popped. It hissed as it rose into the sky, bursting into a brilliant red illumination that washed out our night vision goggles. We were blind. And then the world exploded. Chapter 17. The Ring of Fire. It didn't start with small arms. It started with an RPG, rocket-propelled grenade. Whoosh, crack, boom. The rocket hit the outer wall of the compound, blowing a hole in the mud bricks and showering us with debris. The concussion wave knocked Kowalski flat. Before the dust could settle, the machine guns opened up. It wasn't from one direction, it was from everywhere. The ridges above the village lit up with muzzle flashes to the north, the east, the west. We were in a bowl, and the rim was on fire. "Contact, 360 degrees, we are surrounded," Ramirez screamed, grabbing Kowalski and dragging him to cover. Bullets chewed up the mud walls. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It sounded like angry hornets hitting a drum. Tracers poured into the courtyard, crisscrossing in a deadly net of light. "Return fire! Pick a target and suppress!" I crawled to a window and leveled my M4. I couldn't see individual men. I just saw the sparkling flashes of their guns in the tree line. I fired short, controlled bursts. Pop, pop, pop. It felt pathetic. We were fighting a hurricane with water pistols. "RPG, get down!" Another rocket slammed into the roof. Dust and straw rained down on us. My ears were ringing so hard, I felt dizzy. "We can't stay here," I yelled at Ramirez. "This building is soft cover. They're going to bring the roof down on us." "We have to hold," Ramirez yelled back. "We can't move in the open. We're fish in a barrel out there." I looked at Doc. He was crouched in the corner, his weapon trained on the door. He looked calm, terrifyingly calm. "Kowalski," I shouted, "get on the saw, squad automatic weapon, lay down some hate." Kowalski was curled in a fetal position, his hands over his helmet. He was frozen. The freeze response. "It happens." I crawled over to him and grabbed his vest. I shook him hard. "Kowalski, you die here or you fight here. Pick one." He looked at me with wide, wet eyes. Then he nodded. He grabbed the heavy machine gun and mounted it on the window ledge. Brrrt! The saw roared to life, spitting brass casings onto the floor. The sound of our own heavy gun gave us a moment of hope. We were fighting back. Chapter 18. The Alamo, 20 minutes. We had been pinned down for 20 minutes. It felt like 20 years. We were burning through ammo. "I'm black on ammo," Jenkins's replacement shouted. "Last mag. Redistribute," Ramirez ordered. "Pass the ammo." I tossed a magazine to Kowalski. I had 3 left. 3 magazines, that's 90 rounds. That's about 2 minutes of sustained combat. The enemy was getting closer. They were moving down from the ridges, closing the noose. I could hear their voices now, shouting commands. They sounded excited. They knew they had us. They fired an illumination round. A parachute flare hung over the village, bathing us in flickering artificial daylight. Our shadows danced on the walls like demons. "They're bracketing the building with mortars," Doc said, listening to the thumps outside. "Next one comes through the roof." Ramirez was screaming into the radio handset, trying to break through the jamming. "Granite Main, this is Viper. We are overrun. Broken Arrow. I repeat, Broken Arrow." Broken Arrow, the code for a unit about to be destroyed. It means, "Drop everything you have on my position, because we are dead anyway." Finally, a voice cut through the static. A pilot. "Viper, this is Spooky 4-1. We hear you. We are orbiting. Danger close is authorized. Keep your heads down. Spooky, an AC-130 gunship, the Angel of Death." "They're rushing the gate," I yelled. Through the breach in the wall, I saw shadows sprinting across the open ground. They were charging. Suicide tactics. "Grenades!" I pulled the pin on a frag grenade and threw it over the wall. Boom! Screams followed, but more were coming. "Fix bayonets if you got 'em," Ramirez muttered. He pulled his pistol. This was it. The Alamo. The last stand. I looked at the picture of my family inside my helmet one last time. "I'm sorry, Mum." I tried. Chapter 19. Rain of Fire. Then the sky opened up. It wasn't a sound. It was a vibration that turned your bones to jelly. The AC-130 opened fire with its 105mm howitzer. Boom! The earth shook. The building across the street simply vaporized. 1 second it was there, the next it was a cloud of dust and red mist. Then came the 40mm Bofors cannon. Thump, 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 thump. Explosions walked a line across the field where the enemy was charging. The shadows disappeared in flashes of orange fire. Then the 25mm Gatling gun. Brrrt! It sounded like canvas ripping. A continuous stream of high-explosive rounds churned the earth into hamburger meat. We huddled on the floor, mouths open, hands over our ears. Dust fell from the ceiling, burying us. It was the most terrifying display of power I had ever seen. It was godlike. The pilot's voice came over the radio, calm, detached. Good effects. Adjusting fire, clearing the ridgeline. The gunship circled above us, invisible in the night, raining down death with mathematical precision. The enemy fire stopped. You cannot fight a gunship with AK-47s. You can only die. For 10 minutes, the gunship sanitized the valley. It scrubbed the ridges clean. When the guns finally stopped, the silence that followed was deafening. My ears were ringing so hard, I thought they were bleeding. "Viper, this is Spooky. You are clear to exfil. Dust-off birds are inbound. Get to the LZ." We were alive. The hammer of God had saved us. Chapter 20. The empty seat. "Sound off," Ramirez croaked. He stood up, shaking the dust off his armor. "Miller, green." "Kowalski, green." "Doc." Silence. "Doc." I turned to the corner where Doc had been covering the rear window. He was sitting there, slumped against the wall. His rifle was in his lap. His head was tipped forward, chin on his chest. "Doc?" I crawled over to him. I shook his shoulder. He slid sideways. There was a small hole in his neck, right above the collar of his body armor. A lucky shot, or an unlucky one. Blood had soaked the front of his uniform. It was dark, almost black in the shadows. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I checked for a pulse. His skin was warm, but there was no rhythm. The philosopher, the moral compass, the man who read books and saved lives, was gone. Ramirez came over. He shone his red light on Doc's face. Doc's eyes were open, staring at nothing. Ramirez didn't say anything. He just closed Doc's eyes with a thumb. Grab his gear, Ramirez said. His voice was dead. We don't leave him. We carried Doc to the LZ. He wasn't heavy. He felt lighter than he should have. Maybe because the spirit was gone. The medevac helicopter landed. We loaded Doc's body onto the floor. We climbed in after him. The ride back to the fob was silent. I stared at the body bag. I thought about the book Doc was writing, The Futility of Human Endeavor. I wondered if he had finished the last chapter, or if this was the last chapter. When we landed at the fob, the sun was just starting to rise, a beautiful pink and orange sunrise over the mountains, the same mountains that had just tried to eat us. We unloaded the body. The medics took him away. I stood on the tarmac, shivering in the morning chill. I looked across the base. Farhad was there, standing by the ANA barracks. He was drinking tea. He saw me. He didn't smile this time. He just nodded. A slow, respectful nod, like one warrior acknowledging another survivor. But inside me, something broke. The grief turned into something else. Something hot and jagged. Rage, pure white-hot rage. The paranoia was gone. The fear was gone. There was only the need for justice. And if the army wouldn't give it to me, I would take it myself. Grief is a shapeshifter. At first, it is a hollow ache, a vacuum in your chest where your lungs used to be. Then it turns into shock, a numbing ice that coats your nerves. But eventually, if you let it sit too long, in the heat of the desert, it curdles into rage. I stood on the tarmac, watching the medevac bird disappear with Doc's body. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a vibrating, kinetic energy that needed a release valve. I looked at the ANA barracks. Farhad was still there. He was leaning against a HESCO barrier, smoking a cigarette. He wasn't smiling anymore, but he wasn't mourning either. He looked indifferent, like a man watching a weather report. I didn't make a conscious decision to walk toward him. My legs just moved. I unclipped the chin strap of my helmet. I unslung my rifle and handed it to a confused private standing nearby. "Hold this," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from underwater. I walked across the gravel. The crunch of my boots was the only sound in the world. Ramirez saw me. He shouted something. "Miller, stand down." I didn't hear him. I only saw Farhad. I saw the phone in his hand, the phone that sent the text that killed Doc. Farhad saw me coming. He stood up straight, flicking his cigarette away. He reached for his AK-47 leaning against the wall. He was too slow. I hit him like a freight train. I didn't punch him. I tackled him. We hit the dust hard. I was on top of him instantly. My hands found his throat. I squeezed. I wanted to feel the life go out of him. I wanted to see the light fade from his eyes, just like it faded from Doc's. He clawed at my face. He struck my eye, my nose. I didn't feel it. I slammed his head against the hard-packed earth. Once, twice. "You killed him," I screamed, spitting blood and saliva into his face. "You killed him," Afghan soldiers shouted. Americans shouted. Hands grabbed my vest. They tried to pull me off. I fought them. I was a wild animal. I was possessed by the ghosts of the mountain. "Get off him, Miller." It took 3 men to drag me off. Ramirez had me in a chokehold, dragging me backward. "Enough! That's enough!" I was panting, my chest heaving. Farhad was lying in the dirt, gasping for air, blood running from his nose. He looked at me with fear. Finally, fear. "He did it," I wheezed, pointing a shaking finger at him. "Check his phone. He did it." Ramirez shoved me against a wall. His face was inches from mine. He looked furious, but also sad. "It doesn't matter, Cal," he whispered. "Even if he did, you can't do this. You just assaulted an ally in front of the whole base. It's over." I looked at my knuckles. They were split and bleeding. "I don't care," I said, and I meant it. The career, the rank, the honor, it was all dust. Doc was dead. Justice was the only thing that mattered, and I had just tried to take it with my bare hands. Chapter 22. The Grey Room. There is no courtroom drama in the military. There are no speeches, no gavels banging. There is just a small grey room with a metal table and a fluorescent light that hums too loudly. I sat in that room for 4 hours. My hands were cuffed to the table. They had taken my laces and my belt. I was stripped of my armor, my weapon, my identity. I was just a prisoner in a tan t-shirt. The colonel came in. He looked tired. He didn't yell. He sat down and opened a file. "Sergeant Miller," he said, "do you know how much paperwork you just created for me?" I didn't answer. I was staring at a crack in the concrete floor. "We checked the AN soldier's phone," the colonel said quietly. I looked up. "And?" "It was encrypted. We couldn't break it. And even if we could, we can't prove who he texted. There is no smoking gun." "He knew," I said. "He knew we were coming." "Maybe," the colonel sighed, "but in the eyes of the law, maybe isn't enough to beat a man half to death." He closed the file. "You're a good soldier, Miller. You have a Silver Star recommendation for the action on the mountain. But you just assaulted a coalition partner. Politically, you are radioactive." He leaned forward. "We are going to Article 15U, reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, and a general discharge. You're going home, Caleb, not as a hero, but not as a criminal either. We're sweeping this under the rug. You're done." Done. The word hung in the air. I wasn't angry. I felt a wave of relief. The war was over for me. I didn't have to wait for the next bullet. I didn't have to wait for the next IED. "Thank you, sir," I said. "Don't thank me," he said, standing up. "You're going to have to live with this. That's punishment enough." They put me on a C-17 cargo plane the next night. I was the only passenger sitting in the vast, empty belly of the aircraft, surrounded by pallets of broken equipment. As the plane lifted off, I felt the G-force pushing me into the seat. I didn't look out the window. I didn't want to see the mountains one last time. I closed my eyes and listened to the engines. They sounded like a lullaby. "Go to sleep, Caleb, go to sleep," but I knew I wouldn't sleep. Not really, not ever again. Chapter 23, The Alien Planet. Oklahoma. In September is beautiful. The heat breaks, the leaves start to turn gold, and the light has a soft golden quality. My parents picked me up at the airport in Tulsa. They held a sign that said, "Welcome home, Caleb." My mum was crying. My dad shook my hand with a grip that was too tight. "You look thin, son," my dad said. "The food wasn't great," I lied. The drive to the farm was surreal. The car was quiet. The roads were smooth. There were no potholes, no trash piles, no IEDs. The cars stayed in their lanes. It felt fake. It felt like a movie set. "Look at the new barn," my dad pointed out as we pulled into the driveway. "Painted it last week." "Looks good, Dad." My voice sounded flat. I tried to inject some enthusiasm, some emotion, but the tank was empty. The house smelled of pot roast and furniture polish. It was overwhelming. Too many smells, too many colors. My dog, Buster, ran up to me, barking excitedly. I flinched. My hand twitched toward my hip, reaching for a pistol that wasn't there. My dad saw it. He saw the flinch. He saw the 1,000-yard stare. He had seen it in the mirror 40 years ago when he came back from the Mekong Delta. He didn't say anything. He just put a hand on my shoulder. "Let's get you inside," he said softly. "It's quiet inside." That night, they threw a party, a welcome home barbecue. Neighbors came, cousins came, people I hadn't seen in years. They slapped my back. They handed me beers. "How was it over there? Did you kill anyone? I bet it's hot, huh?" They asked the questions like they were asking about a vacation. They wanted stories. They wanted Call of Duty. They didn't want the smell of burning trash or the sound of Doc dying. "It was long," I said over and over again. "It was just long." I retreated to the porch. The noise of the party was too much. The laughter sounded aggressive. I looked out at the cornfields. The sun was setting. The stalks were swaying in the wind. For a second, the corn turned into tall grass. The fireflies turned into tracers. The tractor in the distance turned into a tank. I gripped the railing. "You're home," I whispered to myself. "You're safe." But my body didn't believe me. My pulse was racing. I was scanning the tree line for movement. The geography had changed, but the map in my head was still drawn in the dirt of the Pech Valley. Chapter 24. The Cereal Aisle. 2 weeks later, my mum asked me to go to the grocery store. "Just grab some milk and cereal, Caleb. It'll be good for you to get out." I drove my dad's truck into town. I parked in the lot. I walked through the automatic doors. And I walked into a nightmare. The supermarket was bright. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The same hum as the interrogation room. The air conditioning was freezing. I walked down the aisles. They were towering walls of color, thousands of products, screaming for attention. I reached the cereal aisle. It was endless. Cheerios, cornflakes, Frosted Flakes, Lucky Charms, 50 different kinds of granola. Organic, gluten-free, with raisins, without raisins. I stood there staring at the boxes. In the ant farm, we had two choices, eat or starve. Here I had 100 choices for breakfast. Why? Why did we need so many choices? It felt obscene. It felt wasteful. A woman walked past me, talking on her phone, laughing. She was complaining about her latte being too cold. I wanted to scream at her. Do you know what cold is? Do you know what thirst is? My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The walls of cereal boxes seemed to be closing in, leaning over me like the cliffs of the valley. My heart hammered against my ribs, thump, 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 like a mortar barrage. I started to sweat. In the freezing aisle, I was drenched in sweat. Then somewhere in the next aisle, a jar dropped. Crash. It sounded like a gunshot. I didn't think. I reacted. I dropped to one knee, spinning around, invisible rifle raised to my shoulder. Contact, I hissed. Then silence. People were staring at me. A mother pulled her child closer. An old man looked at me with pity. I was kneeling on the linoleum floor of a Walmart, trembling, ready to kill an invisible enemy. I stood up slowly. My face burned with shame. I left the cart. I left the milk. I ran out of the store. I sat in the truck, gripping the steering wheel, gasping for air. I was a monster. I was a broken toy. I didn't belong here. I belonged in the dust. Chapter 25. The kingdom remains. 5 years have passed. I live alone now. I work construction. It suits me. It's hard work, physical work. It keeps my hands busy and my mind tired. The noise of the jackhammers drowns out the noise in my head. I don't see my parents much. I know it hurts them, but it's better this way. I'm a ghost in their house, a reminder of a war they want to forget. My apartment is small. It is sparse, a bed, a table, a chair. I keep it clean, military clean. Every morning, I make my bed. Hospital corners, tight enough to bounce a quarter off. Every night, I check the locks. 3 times. I sleep with the window open, even in winter. I need to hear the outside. I need to hear if they are coming. I still have the notebook, the one I carried in my pocket. It sits on my nightstand. I haven't opened it in 5 years. I don't need to. I know what's written there. Sometimes, late at night when the whiskey does its job and the edges of the world get soft, I close my eyes and I am back there. I am back in the ant farm. I can smell the burning shit in the burn pits. I can feel the grit of the moon dust between my teeth. I can see Ramirez smoking. I can see Jenkins laughing. I can see Doc reading his book. And I see the boy with the green eyes. The boy with the rock. He is older now. Maybe he is a fighter. Maybe he is dead. But in my mind, he is always 7 years old, standing in the dust, judging me. They tell you that you leave the war when you get on the plane. They lie. The plane just moves your body. Your mind stays behind, wandering the ridges, checking for IEDs, waiting for the sun to rise over the Hindu Kush. I am Caleb Miller. I live in Oklahoma. I pay my taxes. I buy my groceries. But that is just a cover story. In truth, I am a citizen of the kingdom of dust. And I suspect I always will be.